to have her with us. Let me say, in March, many of you were with us from around the country, some of the chapter leaders, when we did the march from Selma to Montgomery about voter rights. That Sunday in the Brown Chapel, which is the traditional service to commemorate that, our morning speaker ended up being a Methodist preacher by the name of Lisa Jackson. She stunned the audience and she stunned the civil rights leadership. She didn't stun me, she spoke at our Martin Luther King breakfast, and I know she can go. She is a profoundly efficient as well as eloquent member of the President's Cabinet. She heads the Environmental Protection Agency, and she broke in her schedule to come, even though she could have said, I did y'all's breakfast in January. She said, no, I'll come and share with the leadership from around the country of National Action Network. May we welcome the administrator, EPA Administrator, Lisa Jackson.
Let me just start by saying, first, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with each and every one of you. But I have to start by thanking Reverend Sharpton, not just for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you this afternoon, which I will never turn down and always rearrange my schedule for, but as the mother of two teenage African-American male children. Thank you. I actually can't get more important it was for us as a family to tune in and listen to your words during a period of incredible fear and anger for our families. And to my home, Mark Morial grew up around the corner, so I can't, I see him as the head of the Urban League, but I also see him as Mark. Back in the day, still today, I know his wife, so much respect. Now I'm really glad to be with you all and to pass it, you know, it is what it is. You've heard from my administration colleagues. I'm happy for the chance to speak to you about health, and environmental protection, and why it is so important for you as leaders in our communities, and why it's so important for our president. First, I want to talk a minute about what it means to be here in this moment, in the midst of all these challenges, and to be the authors of this chapter in our history. You heard that I have the extraordinary opportunity to speak at Brown Chapel in Selma, Alabama. I was proud to join Reverend Sharpton and Congressman John Lewis and Jesse Jackson and so many others to remember and honor the Bloody Sunday bridge crossing that happened in 1965. I spoke that day, as President Obama often has, of being a part of the Joshua generation. In the Bible, Joshua took the mantle of leadership after the passing of Moses. In much the same way the people of my generation, our generation, have taken on leadership in the next phase of our struggles. We are inheritors of the Moses generation, those who came before us and led us along the path to freedom. We are the generation that must now continue the work and bring people into the promised land. It is because of the work of the Moses generation that I have the extraordinary honor to serve as the first African-American administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the first African-American president of our country. That work also allows me to be part of the most diverse cabinet in American history, made up of men and women from different heritages, different backgrounds, many of whom you're hearing from as part of your cabinet. And it was because of the path that the Moses generation set us on that as a nation, that our most recent presidential election, which gave me and my colleagues the opportunity to serve, was the most racially and ethnically diverse group of people that ever voted in any presidential election. So I'm very glad to be here today to speak with you about the role that I have chosen in my profession in the work of my Joshua Generation moment. And that's the work to protect our health and our environment. See, I know that the promised land we are moving toward will not be a place where the water and the air and the land are polluted. I believe that my part, small part, in this generation is to make sure that when we get there, it's not going to be a place where pollution weighs heavily on our health and on our prosperity. But just saying that is nice. This is about the work. Because environmental conditions continue to have a serious and often disproportionate impact on our communities today. Consider the fact that heart disease, cancer, and respiratory illnesses are 3 of the top 4 most fatal health threats in America. I don't think anyone would argue that. Consider that all of those illnesses have been linked to pollution in our air and our water. All 3 have had an overwhelming impact on our communities. Stop for a second and don't go any further than your immediate family and tell me that there's not someone who went too soon of heart disease or cancer or a respiratory illness like bronchitis or asthma that didn't just make them sick, but took them from your family. African Americans are entering emergency rooms for asthma treatments at 3.5 times the rate that whites do. We die from asthma attacks twice as often. And asthma is not the only disparity we face in the African American community. Mortality rates for cancer are higher for us than for any other group. Heart disease is the most fatal illness in the Black community. We can all share those stories about loved ones, friends. My father passed away from a heart attack when I was in high school. My youngest son, that teenager I was mentioning, he's already that old, but he spent his very first Christmas in the hospital trying to breathe. And he's fought with asthma his whole life. So this conference is wonderful because it brings us together to talk about a range of issues that face our community. Some are right in our face and some we don't see each and every day. So let me point out that those range of issues are all interrelated. Environmental issues, like many of them, rarely travel alone. Where there are health challenges, other challenges are often there. Maybe they follow, maybe they're already there. Take education. Exposure to pollution accounts for millions of lost school days each and every year. Every time I talk to a group of school children, I say, how many of you have asthma? In our communities, the numbers are overwhelming. If I ask them to how many of you have a sibling or a cousin with asthma, it's virtually 100% of the class. How can you build the foundations for our children when they're missing day after day of school, or they can't concentrate when they are in class? Or we can talk about the economic challenges that I know you're spending your time on. There are a cost to our small businesses when workers are at a greater risk of illness. There are costs to employers and lost productivity when workers have to call out sick. There are costs to communities when environmental pollution and degradation keeps a business from coming and investing in that neighborhood. They go somewhere else. Poison in our ground means poison in our economy. A weak environment means a weak consumer base, and unhealthy air means an unhealthy atmosphere for investments. But now let's flip it around. A clean, healthy community is a good place to buy a home and raise a family. It's more competitive in the race to attract new businesses, and it has what it needs for prosperity. So environmental issues are health issues, and educational issues, and economic issues. For many of us, those things translate into moral issues. President Obama often speaks about rebuilding our economy around the values that we Americans hold dear. It is consistent with our values to say that companies shouldn't be able to dump toxins in the air that we breathe or the water that we drink. It's consistent with those values to say that the food we put on our plate shouldn't be covered with harmful chemicals that threaten our health or the health of our children. And it's consistent with our values to say that poor and minority communities shouldn't bear the heaviest burdens of pollution and the health threats that that pollution brings. If we want true equality, then we can't let the heaviest burdens of pollution and health threats fall on poorest communities. We can't ignore disparities in environmental health threats facing African Americans because they're uncomfortable. We can't sit in the back and talk about how environmental degradation is chasing jobs and opportunities out of our neighborhoods and shake our heads. This is one place where my section of the Joshua generation has work to do. In the last 3 years, we've worked hard to ensure that environmental and health protections are reaching every community. First and foremost, we've developed a comprehensive environmental justice plan at EPA. And it's not just EPA, but we've now been joined by the entire Obama administration. I've called on every program at EPA. Every government agency is also doing the same. Every program is doing its part to address environmental justice disparities, to raise awareness, to consider the impacts of its decisions on vulnerable populations. It's not just the work of the EPA. We've established or increased the number of job-creating restoration activities. One of my personal favorites, because we grew up in New Orleans in the shadow of a mighty river, is the Interagency Federal Urban Waters Partnership. That effort is designed to do a couple of things. First, reconnect people with their waterfronts and give them opportunities to revitalize those areas as part of building healthier, stronger communities. And don't think that that doesn't help our community. Just bringing our children, our people back to the waterfront begins to build that connection as a community, especially in urban areas, which are organized around our mighty rivers. Another example is our Brownfields program, an initiative that cleans up contaminated areas, repurposes them. I like to call it the Recycle the Land program. We don't want you to build your new business somewhere way out there that it takes us forever to get to in a car or on the bus. We want you in the community, but sometimes that means job training or cleanup, and that's where EPA is doing its work. We've also, and I'm very proud of this, taken long overdue action to clean up the air we all breathe. At the end of last year, EPA finalized its mercury and air toxic standards that limit mercury and emissions from power plants. Mercury is a neurotoxin, folks. It is toxic to our brains. It's toxic to our children as their brains develop, and it starts even before our children are born. Before those standards were put in place under this administration just last year, there were no national standards limiting mercury emissions from power plants. And that wasn't for lack of trying. You see, the Clean Air Act called for those standards over 20 years ago. But it wasn't until recently when we brought together community groups and mothers and doctors and fishers and environmentalists and others that we were able to get MATS done. It is a major victory for our health. Once the MATS standards are fully implemented, they will prevent up to 11,000 premature deaths a year, nearly 5,000 heart attacks, and 130,000 asthma attacks a year. Behind those numbers are stories, pregnant mothers who can rest a little easier knowing that their children won't be exposed to harmful toxins, young people who can go outside without worrying, or their parents worrying about an asthma attack. We're doing our best to make real changes in people's lives. When I was in Selma, I borrowed some of the words to that effect from the wonderful Reverend Joseph Lowery. Like much of what Reverend Lowery has said, it bears repeating here today and every day. He said many memorable things, but what I'm thinking of are his words at the memorial for Rosa Parks when he said that we wouldn't do justice to her memory by letting our tribute end in ceremony. Reverend Lowery said that you have to move from ceremony to sacrament. We have to do more than just honor the history. In fact, we do it little honor if we don't take action to keep our history moving forward. This is the call to the Joshua generation. This is why we have a National Action Network. And this is why I'm here to ask you for your support. Because there are people today who will tell you that the best path forward is to strengthen the protections for the polluters who make us sick and dirty our communities instead of making sure that we are protected. There is a large and loud group of people who seem to think that in order to move ahead economically, we need to be willing to sacrifice our environment, which is asking us to sacrifice our health. In fact, they seem to feel that way about a lot of issues, that you can't move forward, we just need to roll back. But we're the Joshua generation, and we know better. And if we're going to fulfill our promise, then we have to do more for the next generation, not less. In the Joshua story, after crossing the Jordan River, Joshua had his followers gather up 12 stones from the riverbed. Remember that?
Yeah.
And establish a memorial. Why do you have a memorial? So that the children would remember their history. So I ask you, what will our 12-stone memorial look like? What will our 12 stones be? What will this generation leave behind to let our children know what challenges we took on and overcame? Years from now, will there be one stone for closing the achievement gap in education? Will we be able to lay down one stone for rebuilding our struggling cities? How about one stone for helping African American families that are still living in an economic recession today? How about one stone for bringing health care to every American? And one stone for ending the epidemics of violence and drugs that have ended too many promising lives. And certainly, we should have one stone to remind us to keep marching until people are more focused on passing laws that make it easier for Americans to vote, all Americans, not harder. The list goes on, but you better give me a stone for environmental justice. Please. I'm asking you and calling on you today to help me in that effort. This month is Earth Month. 9 days on Sunday the 22nd, we will celebrate another Earth Day. I challenge all of you to take some time, find a way to make those environmental health issues part of your conversation this month in your communities, and get involved in the health of your communities. And I challenge you as leaders in your community to step up and raise awareness about what clean air and clean water mean to our children. Not to some faraway place, but our children. I challenge us to make a lasting priority in our lives and to take action where it needs to be taken. This is how I believe we live up to our title and our awesome responsibility as the Joshua generation. I look forward to moving forward with you. Please invite me back. Thank you very much.
Administrator Lisa Jackson. Before you leave, Administrator Jackson, I want to say two things. One, you know, the press distorts everything, so you know they're going to say tomorrow she came to Action Network and told all of y'all to get a stone and throw it, you know. But I also want her to know that when she said that when Joshua crossed the Jordan, she said, and gathered the stones, she looked at us and said, you remember that? Mark and I read about it. Reverend Richardson remembers it. Thank you, Administrator Jackson.